The night air over the river was heavy with silence as the Ukrainian soldiers lay hidden among the trees watching the long steel bridge that stretched across the water. The bridge was not just any crossing, it was a lifeline, a corridor for Russian armor and supplies trying to push deeper into Ukrainian territory. Weeks of preparation had gone into turning it into a trap. Engineers had studied every bolt and support every vibration of trucks that rumbled across it during reconnaissance. Drones had scanned it from the air day after day, and intelligence officers had tracked the Russian convoys inching closer with each passing night. The Ukrainians knew the Russians would come. Captain Dmytro crouched low in the dirt, his eyes fixed on the faint outline of the bridge through his night vision scope. He could hear the breath of the men around him, steady, controlled, trained to wait. Each soldier had rehearsed this moment countless times, yet now as the night stretched on, their nerves tingled with the weight of reality. Once the trap was sprung, there would be no turning back. The Russians had more men, more armor, more artillery. All Ukraine had was timing, precision, and the determination not to surrender even an inch of ground. Dmytro whispered into his radio, checking in with the units scattered along the riverbank. Across the water on the far side, more squads were concealed, waiting for the signal. Snipers had positions overlooking the bridge, and demolition teams had set charges along the pillars. They had one chance. If the ambush failed, the Russians would push through and overwhelm nearby villages, cutting off civilians and surrounding Ukrainian defenders in the region. This ambush was not just a tactical maneuver, it was survival. The first sound came like a whisper across the water, the deep rumble of engines far in the distance. The men stiffened, adjusting their grips on rifles and launchers. The night vision lenses caught faint shapes moving slowly closer, headlights flashing briefly before being cut. The Russians were coming cautiously but predictably. They believed their armor gave them dominance. They believed the bridge was secure. Dmytro almost smiled beneath his breath, because that belief was exactly what Ukraine had been waiting for. Minutes stretched like hours as the first armored vehicle reached the edge of the bridge. The sound of treads on steel echoed unnaturally loud across the water. One by one more vehicles followed, heavy with troops and ammunition. In the darkness, the convoy looked like a serpent winding its way onto the narrow span, the river beneath it swallowing the sound in ripples. The Ukrainians watched, unmoving, hearts steady. Timing was everything. Detonate too soon and only the lead vehicles would be lost. Detonate too late and the Russians would spread out and strike back. Dmytro kept his eyes on the convoy, waiting for the moment when the bridge carried its maximum weight. From his earpiece came a soft voice, the engineer confirming in code that the charges were armed and stable. The snipers checked in, ready to strike at any survivors. The anti-tank teams whispered their readiness. Every soldier along that bank carried the knowledge that if they failed, the Russians would discover their positions and rain artillery upon them. There was no room for hesitation. As the 10th vehicle rolled onto the bridge, Dmytro exhaled slowly. His hand hovered over the trigger device, a small black box that could change the course of the night. He whispered a short prayer, not for himself but for his men and for the families waiting in villages behind them. Then, with a calmness that surprised even him, he pressed the button. The night exploded. The bridge lit up in a cascade of fire and thunder as the charges erupted, tearing steel and concrete apart in a roaring chain. The explosion shattered the silence and flung shards of metal high into the sky. Vehicles on the bridge lurched violently, some thrown into the river, others crumpled and burning. Russian soldiers screamed, their voices lost in the inferno. The serpent convoy was cut in half, its head plunged into chaos, its tail frozen in shock. At once the Ukrainians opened fire. From the treeline, rockets streaked across the water, slamming into surviving vehicles. Snipers picked off disoriented soldiers scrambling for cover. Mortars thumped, launching shells into the congested convoy trapped on the road. The Russians were caught between fire and water, nowhere to run. Their radios crackled frantically as commanders tried to rally, but the ambush was too precise, too sudden, too merciless. Dmytro kept shouting orders over the radio, directing fire toward the largest targets. The team on the far bank launched more rockets, striking the rear vehicles to ensure no retreat. Flames turned the night into day, painting the sky with orange and black smoke. The river boiled with wreckage and men. The Russians had walked into the perfect trap. Still, the battle was far from easy. Some Russian soldiers managed to disembark, setting up machine guns on the riverbank, firing blindly into the treeline. Tracers cut through the night, slamming into trees. Ukrainian soldiers ducked low, returning fire with calm accuracy. Every round, every shot mattered. They were outnumbered but not outwitted. The ambush raged for what felt like eternity, though it was only minutes. The bridge collapsed section by section, sending armor tumbling into the river. Survivors tried to swim, but Ukrainian snipers ensured few made it far. Dmytro kept scanning, directing his men to shift positions, never staying still long enough for the Russians to lock onto them. The air reeked of smoke, oil and blood. The river that once glimmered under moonlight was now a grave of steel and fire. When the firing finally slowed, the echoes still rang in the men's ears. The Russians were broken, scattered, unable to advance. Ukrainian units quickly pulled back, melting into the forest, leaving behind only devastation. They carried their wounded with quiet efficiency, knowing Russian reinforcements would soon swarm the area. The ambush was over, but the war was not. Dmytro looked back one last time at the burning skeleton of the bridge. It had been a lifeline for the enemy, now it was their tomb. He felt no triumph, only the weight of what survival demanded. The war was measured not in victories but in nights like this, when cunning and courage kept hope alive. The forest swallowed the soldiers as they moved silently away from the river, their boots crunching softly on damp earth, their breaths shallow from adrenaline and exhaustion. Behind them the fire still raged, bright enough to be seen for miles, casting long flickering shadows through the trees. The radio on Dmytro's shoulder crackled faintly with coded confirmations from scattered units, each reporting safe withdrawal. They had survived the night, but the war would soon remind them survival was never enough. The squad regrouped in a clearing where dim moonlight spilled through the canopy. Men slumped against fallen logs, wiping soot from their faces. Some lit cigarettes, their trembling hands barely able to keep the flame steady. Others drank greedily from canteens, their throats raw from smoke and gunpowder. They had sprung the perfect ambush, yet not a single man smiled. Victory meant watching men burn and drown. Victory meant knowing reinforcements would soon arrive, hungry for revenge. Dmytro crouched near the map spread on the ground, illuminated by a red-filtered flashlight. The lines of rivers and roads looked different now, alive with consequence. The destroyed bridge was a scar that would force Russian convoys to reroute, losing precious days. Those days were everything. Days for civilians to evacuate from threatened villages. Days for supplies to reach frontline defenders. Days to breathe. He traced the path with his finger, then folded the map away as one of his sergeants approached. "We lost 2 men," the sergeant said, his voice heavy. He gave their names quietly. Dmytro closed his eyes for a long moment, committing them to memory. They had fought bravely, they had held their fire until the right moment, and now they were gone. Dmytro whispered a promise under his breath that their sacrifice would not be in vain. War had taught him that grief could not be allowed to fester, it had to be carried like a weapon forged into determination. The squad moved before dawn deeper into the forest, using hidden trails known only to locals. They traveled in silence, broken only by the occasional distant thud of artillery. Somewhere far behind, Russian commanders were already piecing together what had happened. Drones would soon circle the skies, searching for survivors or clues. The Ukrainians knew how to vanish. They had learned to live like shadows, leaving behind no trace except fear. By midday they reached an abandoned farmhouse tucked in the folds of rolling hills. Here they rested, patching wounds, sharing rations, whispering updates over encrypted lines. The farmhouse smelled of dust and old hay, but to them it was sanctuary. Dmytro allowed his men to rest, though his own eyes remained fixed on the horizon. He thought of his family far away in the west, his wife and young son who had not seen him for months. Letters were rare, phone calls rarer. He had learned to hold their memory as a shield, to remind himself why he fought, why every ambush, every risk mattered. That evening a courier arrived on motorcycle, mud splattered across his uniform. He carried orders, sealed and urgent. Dmytro broke the wax with rough fingers, scanning the words quickly. The success of the bridge ambush had rippled through command. High Command wanted his unit to prepare another strike, this time on a supply depot further north. The Russians had been shaken but not broken. Every blow mattered, every disruption kept the larger machine of invasion stuttering. The men listened quietly as Dmytro briefed them. Some nodded grimly, others adjusted their gear without a word. No one complained. They were beyond fear, now hardened into resolve. Each mission was a thread in the tapestry of survival. If they did not fight, civilians would pay the price. If they did not strike, the war would consume everything. Night fell again, cloaking the countryside in silence. As they prepared for the next march, Dmytro found himself walking alone near the farmhouse fence. He looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. Once those stars had meant peace, long summer nights and the laughter of children running barefoot through fields. Now they were silent witnesses to fire and ruin. He whispered to them as if they were listening, promising he would return home, promising he would not let despair win. The next mission began with the same patience and precision. They moved in small groups, traveling at night, hiding by day, guided by locals who risked their lives to show secret paths. Every villager they passed offered bread, water, and blessings, even when they had little left for themselves. The people were the backbone of the resistance, their quiet courage fueling the soldiers more than any weapon could. As they neared the supply depot, they discovered Russian patrols had grown thicker, more cautious after the bridge disaster. Armored vehicles prowled roads, drones buzzed faintly in the sky. Dmytro knew the enemy was adapting, learning to fear the forests and rivers. Yet fear also made them hesitant, and hesitation was an ally. The ambush on the depot would be smaller, more surgical, but no less vital. Explosives were planted under cover of night, mines buried where trucks would roll at dawn. Snipers took position on ridges. The men moved with the fluid silence of hunters, each step rehearsed, each signal understood without words. When the sun broke over the horizon, the trap was sprung again. Russian trucks rumbled into the yard loaded with ammunition and fuel. The first blast shattered the morning quiet, hurling flames into the air. Secondary explosions rippled through the depot as stored shells ignited one after another. The earth shook with thunder, the sky filled with smoke. Chaos erupted. Russian soldiers scrambled in confusion, their shouts drowned by fire. Ukrainian snipers picked off officers, directing men blindly, while mortars rained destruction on remaining stockpiles. It lasted less than an hour, but by the end the depot was a smoking crater, supplies reduced to ash. Ukrainian soldiers melted back into the countryside, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. Once again they carried their wounded, once again they counted their dead, and once again they endured. That night, as they sheltered in another abandoned barn, Dmytro listened to the distant echoes of Russian artillery punishing empty forests, trying to strike ghosts. His men lay sleeping, their faces hollow with exhaustion. He remained awake, staring at the ceiling beams. He thought of the bridge, of the depot, of the countless missions still to come. This was their war, not fought for glory or conquest, but for survival, for freedom, for the right to see another dawn. The radio crackled softly with a coded message from command. The ambushes had bought precious time along the front. Civilians had evacuated from threatened villages, convoys of aid had reached defenders in nearby towns. The sacrifices were working piece by piece, day by day, Ukraine endured. Dmytro allowed himself a small exhale of relief. It was not victory, but it was hope. Outside the barn the wind carried the faint scent of smoke from faraway battlefields. The war stretched endlessly across the horizon, yet in that moment Dmytro felt a quiet certainty. They had shown the enemy that steel and fire could be answered with cunning and courage. They had shown the world that even in the face of overwhelming force a nation could fight back. He lay down, finally closing his eyes. Tomorrow another mission would come, another ambush, another test. But tonight he carried the memory of the bridge in his heart, the night when they had lured the invader into a perfect trap and struck with precision, reminding the world that Ukraine still stood unbroken.